You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole. I'm so excited to be here tonight. I've assembled a motley crew of book nerds to help me talk about some great Star Wars material here as we dive into a completely new era of the Star Wars galaxy as the literature is giving us the High Republic. And I have a special Jedi Council just assembled here for your listening pleasure. And back with us, it's been not too long, but Bruce, it's so good to have you back to talk about some Star Wars, as you were previously here just to talk about The Mandalorian Season 2.
That is correct, yes. And then after The Mandalorian, I'm like, well, what's next? And here we are.
Yes. Well, we just try to make you happy by keeping you on. So I'm glad you're back, and really excited to have a good friend of the show and good personal friend of myself, William Devereux, back to here, and a book aficionado for Star Wars, over on Ioncast.
Thanks for having me on. It is fun to be back on the show.
Yeah, it's great.
Talking Light of the Jedi, a new era for Star Wars.
That's right. And excuse me, I misrepresented yourself there. I apologize. Ion Canon podcast. Excuse me.
Yes.
I don't even know what I was thinking. I was just so excited to have you on. I got a little flustered. Whew, is it hot in here? Anyway, all right. Well, we're excited to be here to dive into this brand new era of Star Wars. But before we do that, of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Please do follow us on Twitter at the 602 Club, as well as Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. You can also find us all over the place wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you get the podcast as soon as it drops. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please give us a star rating and review. You can also find us on Trek.fm, our website. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. There's the listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference you can be a part of and talk to listeners from all around the world. And then you can go to trek.fm/contact and send us an email. So, and Christy and I love getting emails, and she'll be back next week as we're diving into something really exciting. I'm actually really just looking forward to what we're going to be getting into next week, which is The Fifth Element. But before we get there, I also want to say a huge thank you to the associate producers we have here through Patreon. Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Maillet, and Daniel Noah. I really appreciate them supporting the show each and every week here through Patreon. And, as we have been hard hit, just as everybody has in the past year, we could definitely use your help. Go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of the team. Make sure all of the shows keep coming to you. Chris and I are working hard to even revamp a lot of those bonus and extras that you can get as well. So that'll be coming to you this year. But again, we need your help to make sure the network keeps coming to you. So go to patreon.com/TrekFM. Well, gentlemen, so this is a whole new era of Star Wars. This is 200 years before The Phantom Menace takes place. And this book and the era itself, it starts out with a disaster. And this disaster, we learn, is been put together by a nefarious gentleman, leader of the Nihil, I think is how you say it. If anybody's read the audiobook here, please correct me, but I think it's the Nihil. And I think you would say his name, Marchion Ro, as well, and he's their leader for all intents and purposes. And basically, he set this whole thing up to galvanize the Nihil into a much more coherent group so that they can go galaxy-wide. They've pretty much been in the Outer Rim. So we have this disaster. How do you guys think that this works as kind of like kicking off this entire era here of a place in Star Wars we'd never been?
Well, that's just what I think it feels like as a kickoff to an entire era. Because, when it starts off, it focuses on this disaster for at least a third of the book. I mean, it's a good chunk of it. When you first start off, it's about this disaster. So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, okay, what are we building to? What are we trying to get to? Who are our central characters in this? But what we're getting is what's going on with this world, what's going on other ships, space stations, what's going on with all these other Jedi, and everybody taking, dealing with this entire situation. And I thought, okay, this is going to lead to something. So I kept wondering, who am I supposed to focus on? Who's the protagonist of this book? But I also, at this point during the disaster, thought, well, this is the setup. So once I came to realize, okay, this is the setup for a bigger story to be told over multiple books, I came to accept it more.
It's really interesting because, in the run up to this era launching, we knew that Light of the Jedi would kick off the era, and we knew that there was this the Nihil, they're very, I don't know if it's Nihil or Nihil, I don't know, and they're probably Nihil, and they're very they're very brutal, right? I think I remember even reading listening in one interview, almost like cannibalistic in some ways. And so this is kind of what I went into the book expecting. And I remember reading somewhere before the book came out that it would have a large portion of the book would be devoted to this disaster. And I thought it would actually be a huge galaxy changing disaster or fairly large at least. So I guess I was surprised when I read the book how different the novel was from my perception going in. It's completely different. I thought it was going to be this massive, massive disaster that changes things. And for the most part, the disaster is pretty much wrapped up in the book. And it's kind of over. It doesn't really, there's some interesting questions around the ramifications of what they discover as a result of the disaster. But the disaster itself is pretty much wrapped up. There's not a lot of, the galaxy doesn't really seem that changed aside from the Nihil being, I guess, trying to be more aggressive from then on. So I was kind of surprised by that. And I was also surprised by, yes, the disaster did take up a large portion of the book. And in some ways it was almost kind of slow going. I kind of liked how you got a flavor for a bunch of different Jedi, but really the people you meet in that first third, some of them play a role and some of them just kind of fizzle out and are not really all that important anymore. And the Nihil, we'll talk about the Nihil more later, but they were completely different than what I was expecting going in. So, I guess my expectations were I was very surprised by where the book ended up going.
Yeah, it's interesting what both of you are saying because I didn't really know what to expect too much. I didn't really read too much about this. I tried to kind of stay away from any of the spoilers other than this, kind of the overarching things that I'd heard. But I tried to stay away from any nitty gritty or anything like that because I just wanted to kind of go into the book in much the same way I would go in with watching The Mandalorian or playing one of the video games like KOTOR or, Jedi Fallen Order kind of thing where you're going to experience the story as you play it or read it. And so, or watch it. And, it was interesting, William, because one of the things that was just really stood out to me with this disaster was the immediate impact that it had on the Republic, which kind of became, in many ways, like a COVID parable, as they had to shut down the hyperspace lanes because of this disaster. I mean, this is a hyperspace disaster. We didn't talk about that yet, but the idea is there is a ship that was traveling through hyperspace, and one of the Nihil ships causes disruption because they have a completely different version of how hyperspace works for them. They use these things called the paths that allow them to do things that normal hyperspace does not. And so they disrupt a ship traveling through hyperspace. That ship breaks apart and then reemerges into different areas of the galaxy, and they call them the emergences. And these emergences are hitting planets, and space stations and all sorts of things causing havoc. And of course, also they have people still alive on them as well. So, I mean, there's all of this stuff that's happening here at the beginning, but the immediate impact of this, like you said, William, is something that is felt in the book, but then is quickly resolved, and it's gone. Like, so it seemed to me like, yes, this seems to last for a while, and, you get planets complaining about, hyperspace lanes being closed and having, food shortages and everything, which again, we've experienced this throughout 2020 and now into 2021, so we're very familiar with this. But I was also surprised to see that it wraps up quite quickly. And that, hyperspace is kind of back to normal by the end of the book. And it feels like, if I remember correctly, the Starlight Beacon was supposed to go online within a few months. So this story really only takes place over a couple months. So it's not as though this disaster lasts like an entire year, 2 years or something in the galaxy. So I was actually a little disappointed that this isn't something that we really spend a lot of time with, and doesn't give us the opportunity to really experience what this might be like if, because they even talk about this, if hyperspace doesn't work, the Republic is dead.
Yeah, and part of me wonders if, I do feel like they're laying a lot of seeds. Like, I think the Starlight Beacon, I suspect, will play more of a role in future books. A lot of the characters we meet, especially the ones at the very beginning, where a lot of just very brief scenes with a whole bunch of different characters, they'll probably play a role in future books. So I think there's going to be small bits that cross over. But for the most part, you really don't have to read Light of the Jedi to enjoy the High Republic era. Like, it can be summarized very briefly, and you're done. I thought the disaster... I enjoyed reading it, but it did start to like kind of drag a little bit, and I felt like the book really started once you get into the second part. The physics of the disaster, though, are super fascinating. Like, they've discovered really a way to travel across hyperspace. Typically, like, you start and end, it's just like a single point to jump, and they've discovered that the Nihil discovered these. Specifically Marchian Row and the Santecas have discovered these paths, and
not just these Santecas, but one Santeca, which
specifically, I'm sure we'll get into that, but it has discovered these things called paths, and these allow you to kind of traverse hyperspace and somehow collide with other ships that shouldn't be physically possible, or take very short jumps, or like make turns in hyperspace. Really fascinating. And part of me wonders, reading through this, okay, well, if they discovered this 200 years before the films, what happened to this knowledge? What happened? They don't really answer that in the book. How do the paths get obscure? How did nobody use them in the future? I mean, we've seen shorter hyperspace jumps later on, but nothing to this to this level. And I hope that this era, that they resolve this or kind of answer, why aren't these paths being used in future in the films later on, because it's pretty massive technology and galaxy changing.
I just assume when I read the book that the knowledge of the paths will die off, because the knowledge of it will be limited to just certain people and not shared with others. And we're seeing that with Santeca, where she has the knowledge, but that's not being shared, nor is with anybody else except for Ro. And then it's not that information of where the path information is coming from her isn't being shared with others. So no one really knows where this information is coming from. So if these characters were to die off somewhere in these stories, then the paths would be something that the future would not be aware of or know how to utilize or know how to find the paths. And maybe in the future, there's people who are always trying to, but can never accomplish it.
Yeah. Cause being able to use the paths is obviously might die with, Mari Santeca, but the knowledge that this technology or this capability exists, that's out there now in the galaxy, because, they've discovered that this can be done. The Republic now knows at least theoretically possible. Like there's no other answer for it. And they talk multiple times about how it shouldn't be possible, but clearly it is. The other San Tekkas, they knew, they kind of like alluded to they definitely knew Mari was somehow involved, clearly. But she's been she's been lost to the family, right? They know she's somehow involved. It doesn't sound like they know how to do it themselves, but they know it's possible.
So I think you're both raising some really interesting questions, and this is the thing that one of the things that I think maybe is a detriment to the whole storyline so far, which is one, that this is even possible, because this feels so much more like sci-fi than science fantasy, which is what Star Wars really is. Star Wars is not science fiction. And this is getting a little bit too science fiction-y in some ways, it feels like. But in some ways, too, if Mari San Tekka can do this, there should be somebody else in the galaxy who can do this, too. And there has to be some explanation of how she can do it as well. And to me, it feels like it has to be some kind of force thing. You know, in many ways, this almost felt like skywalking, which we know from the Thrawn books.
Yeah.
And so, but there's got to be a reason for why has this capability. But at the same time, it really felt like the fact that, you know, and this is a detriment to the Nihil themselves, is that if Mari's the only one who can do these paths, it makes the Nihil feel really weak, regardless of how many paths that they have stored up that they can use. It still feels like a handicap from the start that their big threat, because the thing that they are, you know, that really puts them on the map as being any kind of threat in the first place, other than just being your basic pirates, is something that can and will be taken away from them at any time now, because she's going to die. So, like, this whole thing feels like it's starting on a really shaky foundation to me, and it's a little bit disappointing that this is the case. It feels like, to me, and this is just my opinion, but it would have been much smarter to try and find a way to which this is and maybe this is the case, but this is some sort of lost force ability or something that makes much more sense than it's just this one person who has this capability and they've got it. And, you know, obviously the San Tekkas, too, their family were famous, you know, hyperspace explorers. They were the ones charting major hyperspace lanes. So, you know, this seems like maybe it's a San Tekka gift, and we know the San Tekkas, especially in the future, will be part of the Church of the Force. They're going to hold high regard the Force. So it feels like that's all got to be connected somehow, but it felt, right now, it just feels like more of a convenience for the plot, rather than something that feels in any way necessarily organic. And that, again, later books could make that better, but at the same time, it feels like it's incumbent upon this book to help us make us feel comfortable with a lot of these things right out of the gate. Like, that's its job, you know, when you're introducing a whole new era. And like you said, William, too, when it comes to the fact that this might, how this is lost in the future, like when you insert something this big and this galaxy changing to a galaxy that's already pre-existent, that doesn't exist later on, it becomes hard to rationalize why and how this wouldn't exist later on. So,
yeah, and you can try to explain it away for sure. You know, it's not like they can't explain it, but it does feel like they've opened a can of worms that it's going to be much harder to explain away. And you know, yeah, it's fascinating. I do think it's kind of cool, like taking up, you know, it's not, Star Wars is not science fiction. It's more, as you said, more science fantasy. That we could quibble about, you know, whether it makes sense from a scientific standpoint, but the capability is kind of cool, and definitely makes the Nihil seem more, you know, like they can come from anywhere and attack at any time.
You know, and going to this era, what I was hoping that it would free up the authors to do almost anything that they want to. You're far from the Empire and the Clone Wars and everything that's going on there. And so in some respect, you expect something big and epic. I mean, especially if this is a multiple book series. But then when we get into this book, and I'm not saying I don't like the book or I like the book at this point. I'm just saying it just feels like a setup, but it doesn't seem as if it's galaxy changing. But at the same time, like what we're saying is, but if it was set up to be galaxy changing, then why didn't we hear about it in the eras that we're familiar with? Why doesn't it have an impact on those eras? So there's like this fine line of how do you do a series of books like this as big and epic and galaxy changing when it doesn't seem to have an impact in a couple centuries from now. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind it being smaller stories, but then it really wouldn't be anything that would attract a lot of people to read a series of books for small stories. And I think, that's the problem sometimes I feel like the publishing arm is having with Star Wars right now is, well, we don't want to step on the toes of the filmmakers right now, so we have to be careful and kind of keep it down, but bring it up a little, but not too far. And that's what it almost feels like we're getting right now.
And I think part of that has to do with the fact, and look, I mean, we can compare it to our own world, and having read both of the books in the series so far, I know how much, obviously, even just take the United States, how much it changes in 200 years, right? It's changed dramatically.
Right.
But in Star Wars, it's a galaxy far, far away, and things seem to take place in a much longer time span, for over 1,000 generations. The Jedi were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, and so that's what this whole thing is based off of. But it seems like to just go 200 years before, I think you kind of, forgive me for saying it, but I feel like they kind of half-assed it in the sense that don't go just 200 years before. Go 1,000 years before. So you really have a ton of time to play with. And that makes it a lot easier to understand like why 1,000 years of history, could change. And people wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't be under the thought process of people's minds. But when you have characters like Yoda showing up or Jarl Poof or those kind of things, like we have characters who exist in the prequels, and so it's like it's close enough, it's not far enough for me to really kind of buy it. Look, I get somebody's probably yelling at me right now listening to this, but people forgot the Jedi existed, from, the Clone Wars onward, but it's like, but yeah, well, there was also a whole, misinformation campaign going on for 30 years on purpose, so there are story ways that you could get around all of these things. But so far, again,
and we do see, even in real life, people have very
absolutely.
short memories. But yes.
So I think the biggest thing is it's leaving us with a lot of questions that are going to be very interesting to see how they play out. Lastly, just kind of on this whole hyperspace thing, as we've been talking, I was kind of frustrated with the book too when we are trying to solve this problem. And when they needed like 50 some odd thousand nav droids to try and figure this out, I was like, that seems like a really high number, and a little excessive. Like it's Star Wars, especially, and forgive me for saying, but when in The Rise of Skywalker, we get that the fleet at Exegol will have 10,000-fold like the amount of ships that the First Order had. It's like, okay, you're just talking in numbers that are absurd at this point, and I feel like this is kind of doing that as well. Like 50,000 nav droids, like it just, again, you don't have to create numbers that are that big for us to understand the weight of it. Even if you just said like, we need 1,000, I would have still felt like, oh, that seems impossible,
Yeah, and then there's 50,000. Like, how much space does that take up?
Right,
like,
exactly.
Is it miles and miles?
It seemed like you'd need a whole valley, just nothing on it. Like a planet with nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised they don't have like giant server farms. You know,
I mean, that's basically what they created, right? Like
you could argue a lot of server farms are like 50,000 computers, right? But they have a whole droid instead of just like
exactly
taking out the processor and putting in a giant.
Well, when I read how many there were, I thought, wait a second, are they in space? Because that would make sense to me if they're out in space. But then it's like, no.
It would have helped with cooling.
Well, they said the problem is that it wouldn't help with
cooling.
cooling because in space, heat doesn't dissipate. So,
that's right.
Therefore,
yes, that's right.
Yeah, they brought that up specifically. So, it just feels like it would have been better on like an ice planet. Like, why don't you go to Hoth, and do this? It just seems like it'd be the perfect place.
But at least on this planet, at least you can create rain to cool them down.
I mean,
enough rain to cover that
the Jedi
miles.
rain dance, So,
right. Oh, by the way, that scene though, when they said the clouds started to appear, I thought it was the Nile coming. I was like, oh, Nile's coming. And then they said it was rain. I was like, oh. I was really disappointed because I really thought, ooh, this is going to get really good now. And it didn't. I thought they were coming to attack the droids.
I think it's really interesting, when we talk about all of these ideas, and again, this is about introducing us to a new era, and part of that is it's going to raise questions, for Star Wars fans such as ourselves. And I mean, let's be honest, all the people that are Star Wars fans, like super Star Wars fans, are reading these books and asking these same questions. It's not like we're unique, I mean, we're super Star Wars fans are the ones who read Star Wars books. I'm sure if you looked at the actual percentage of Star Wars fans that read the books, it's probably, my guess is like 25%, maybe 30, who are actively reading every single book. So the way we are and ask, it's really interesting. The Nihil, I really wanted to ask you guys about them. I'm really not sure how to feel about them as villains. And what was fascinating to me is I've been recently watching the series Vikings that was on the History Channel, and I swear it's like they had been watching that show and just decided to create Space Vikings, because that's exactly what they feel like. And so how did you guys feel about them as villains? And especially since, I mean, they're supposed to be our foils here so far for the Jedi.
I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I was surprised by their portrayal. Like, going into this, they said Space Vikings. They said one of the things they said the most, I think, is like one of the core concepts for the Nihil was, what do the Jedi fear, or what scares the Jedi?
Space Vikings, apparently.
Yeah, that's what they kept talking about. And I kind of in my head almost had like they're like the Yuuzhan Vong, especially with a lot of the concept art was very Vong-like, the art they shared. Not the same, but very much more organic and stuff poking out everywhere, and et cetera. And that really wasn't this at all. The Viking part, the Viking analogy is apt. But I was very surprised by how much how much character development they got, and how much they tried to almost humanize the Nihil. They weren't, again, they didn't really feel, they were definitely evil and out for themselves, but they didn't really feel like cannibalistic or like the Yuuzhan Vong or anything like that. They were, they had really fascinating leadership structure, right? They had Marchion Ro, who's in charge of things. He's getting this information on the paths from his kidnapped Mari Senteca. They had, the three leaders of the Nihil, their groups. I think the Tempests, right? Or I'm trying to get
it's like the
rankings.
Tempest, and then the Storms, and then the Strikes is the lowest, I think, if I remember correctly. So,
yeah. And so that was, interesting. The dynamic, how they work together, it almost made them feel a lot less scary. And at the end, I was like, okay, I actually kind of liked them, but I don't see how they scare the Jedi necessarily, and how they're going to be a permanent villain in the series. I don't know. What did you guys think?
They grew on me. I mean, to the point that you said they got a lot of character development, which I thought they got more so than the Jedi. So I became more interested in them. The Viking piece of it, I found it to be interesting because, in Star Wars, we get all types of different villains and different books and series and movies and such. And at least this isn't an Empire. This isn't Sith. This isn't Force users. So it's going to be something a little different. And the fact that it's on the outer edge made sense to me because I thought they're just going to be a loose gang of baddies out in the outer edge. I don't see anybody well organized. And yet now I feel like because they've discovered a certain power that they have with the paths, that now they can start to organize. Now they have a leader, because there was a lot of infighting prior to this, and there continues to be some infighting. But now it seems like, okay, they're going to get their act together and organize. Why they create much fear in the Jedi, I don't really see a lot of that either, except for fear that they're going to harm others in this sector of the galaxy.
And you brought up a good point, right? The people in that sector, they're definitely scared of the Nihil. They have this reputation about them, but they're as terrifying as their reputation is, it's only in one small part of the galaxy, and they're really not. They're not like everywhere. At the end of the book, they kind of make this. They kind of decide, okay, let's gather more people. Let's go everywhere in the galaxy now. We're not going to just leave ourselves contained to one spot. But while they're terrifying in that one section of the galaxy, they're really a small group when it comes down to it. Like a full third of their organization is wiped out in this book, and there's not a whole lot left. And so, very different than I was expecting. But I liked them, and not like I approved of what they're doing, but I thought they were interesting to read and the dynamics at play.
And I think those people who are afraid, they're more afraid, I think, right now of the paths because of what happened before. And so once they start connect the two, then all of a sudden the fear of the paths is the fear of the Nihil. And they'll think that the Nihil's in charge of the path. And that becomes almost like your super weapon for these stories.
Well, and one of the things that is interesting here is that, there's a quote in the book about how the Nihil, it seems to be this thing that's all about freedom and doing what you want. But once you are a Nihil, you kind of realize that you still have a boot on your chest, even though it didn't always feel like it, because of all of the burn parties and smashing and the thrill of taking what you wanted when you wanted, but you still had to do exactly what your bosses said and the bosses above them. So, like, in many ways, there's this thing about, like, I'll do what I want, like your Cartman from South Park, and yet at the same time, it's really not. And in many ways, the Nihil, they say, was just another form of control, an engine designed to roll credits up to the people at the top of the organization. It is the Viking pyramid scheme, like that's just kind of what this is. And so I think what this is supposed to be is that we are supposed to juxtapose them with the Republic, in the sense that the Republic is, we are all the Republic. That's their motto right now. And so really, I think what they're trying to get at with the Nihil is that it's the idea of the selflessness and the selfish at play here, and which one works out better, which one looks better, which one is better moralistically. Star Wars is all about teaching morals. And so I think that that's the point of the Nihil, really, more so than them necessarily being a foil for the Jedi, which they're really not. I mean, like William, you said, a third of their group is annihilated very easily, honestly. There's some losses on the Jedi side, but this isn't difficult for them. So I think it's more about the thematic elements, but in all honesty, and this is what I kind of disliked about the Nihil and even just the Republic here, is that everything is so on the nose that there's no subtlety here. There's absolutely no subtlety. And, maybe people come back at me and say, well, how much subtlety is there in Emperor Palpatine? But, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the prequels do a pretty good job of making this character who is very subtle in his movements and how he, interacts, and very careful to, this just seems, again, the Nihil as characters just feel so on the nose for, like, we'll do what we want, and the Jedi and the Republic are all, we're all the Republic. And it's like, okay, I just wish, I wish writing these days in so many things, whether television shows or in literature, would stop being so blatant. Like, I want more nuance, and this just has absolutely zero nuance to it, to me.
And that's why I feel that they should focus more on a central group of characters and not be so broad. I mean, because then you can develop all these characters and the nuance and their backstories and why they're doing what they're doing and their relationship and what their conflict is. This just feels to me, as I said earlier, like we're trying to do a big galactic story. It's not about this character versus this character. It's about this group versus that group.
Yeah, I part of me wonders, again, we'll see where the show goes, if they will try to have some of both. You know, if they'll have some stories that are very much more character-centric and not really about the larger conflict, and others will be about the Jedi trying to go up against the Nihil. So there may be some room for that, but I don't disagree.
Well, and I think that leads me to ask you guys about the Republic. I mean, you know, I mentioned the idea of like this whole thing about the Republic's motto is, you know, we are the Republic. And we have a chancellor here is kind of all about her great works, which, you know, to me felt so much like a cross between the Elizabethan Golden Age as well as the WPA in the 30s, like had a baby. And, you know, that's where Starlight Beacon are coming from, this idea that there will be more beacons, this spreading the light of the Republic to the Outer Rim. And so I wondered for both of you as well, you know, how does that work for you? Did the Republic itself and how it's portrayed here, does it work as a storytelling point? And does it just even work as an idea of like, this is what the Republic is at this time period?
I mean, it kind of does. I mean, they want to expand, which, you know, pisses off the Nihil because they're coming into their territory and is going to ruin everything for them. But I really didn't feel like there was a whole lot to the Republic. I mean, it does seem like it's a peaceful time. There probably isn't a whole lot going on. And, you know, they're at a place where there's peace. They can now expand and get to learn about other worlds and get them into the fold. But it just, I didn't feel like we really learned that much about the Republic at this point. They just kind of seemed like they were there. Like, oh yeah, we got the Republic in the book, you know, because that's what we have in Star Wars.
The High Republic, Bruce.
It's the High Republic, right? Because they're all smoking weed or something.
There's a lot of pot shops here in the galaxy at this point.
That's why everything's so light.
Yeah, it's exactly. Everybody's feeling good.
Now that actually would have been more interesting to me. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a lot to say about the Republic in this one.
You know, the Republic itself didn't feel all that different. Overall, like the Chancellor kept talking about the High Republic and everyone, you know, working together and trying to do these great works throughout the galaxy, things like the Starlight Beacon and other big projects that can help the Republic. But kind of taking that out, you know, aside from her kind of mantra of we're all the Republic and let's everybody band together and that sort of thing, which is, you know, it's a noble goal. Aside from that, it didn't feel all that different to the Republic normally. I think there were certainly scenes where everyone came together much faster and much easier than we've seen in other Star Wars eras. Like, you know, when they needed the 50,000 nav droids and everyone just immediately somehow they magically got all the droids they needed. But otherwise, I don't know. It still kind of feels like the Republic to me.
I mean, I agree with you, William, and I think again, I would say one of the things is that obviously this is supposed to be a juxtaposition between the Republic we see in the Phantom Menace, right? Where there is no civility, there is only politics, and it's supposed to be even a juxtaposition of where we are today in our society, where everything just seems to be about your side and my side and our side and whatever. And so, but again, I think the thing that really just sticks in my craw, and this comes from having read the book twice now, is just that it's a lack of subtlety. I think that you could write this without coming up with a slogan to which is so on the nose, where we are all the Republic, and people keep saying it throughout this book, and it makes me kind of want to slap them in the face because it sounds so cheesy. It doesn't sound like it would legitimately come out of anybody's mouth ever, you know? And I think that there's a way to do this in which you can write the same type of story where everybody is coming together, but you don't have to say it. You know, books, as much as film, it's about showing, not telling. And you can show people coming together much more quickly and working together much differently than what we got in the Phantom Menace era, without having somebody so blatantly say, we are all the Republic. And I think that's the thing that I'm really I keep dinging this book for, is that it just feels really on the nose. And I don't need a book to tell me what to think. I need a book to make me feel like I should think in a certain way, right? By its storytelling. I want a book to encourage me to think a specific way because of the actions of the characters, not because they say a slogan. You know, just allow "We Are the Republic" to be... I mean, you could write that on the whiteboard and say, this is the thematic element to which we want characters in the Republic to portray. How do we make them portray that, right? Without having to say it. That's what you should have put on the whiteboard. Like, and instead, I feel like they put on the whiteboard, "We are all the Republic," and they're like, well, if we just keep saying it enough, people will get it. Well, I will get it, but it's also just going to be obnoxious. So, I think it's just it's a disappointing thing here because I will say Soule is a great writer. His Darth Vader one was beyond phenomenal in the comics. One of the best things in new canon, honestly, that I've really, really enjoyed, and I would highly recommend to anyone. And even his Poe Dameron run was really good in the comics as well. So I know that Charles Soule can write excellent stories. I think that here somebody needed to come up needed to edit better. They just needed to say, you know what, we like this idea, but how do we show this instead of telling this?
Yeah, and it makes me wonder as you're talking through this, because I love his other stories, like you mentioned, how much of this was really influenced by committee. I mean, the book keeps saying we are a republic, and it's like, well, we are the committee that's putting these stories together.
Committee.
And Charles
I am not a committee!
Yeah, he's just following this pattern of, okay, this is the direction we want to go in, these are the stories we want to tell, as opposed to, here's Vader or here's Poe Dameron, write a good character story. Instead, it's like, here you go, Charles, we're building this universe, we're building this time, and like you're saying, we're all on a dry erase board writing all these ideas down, and now, put it in and set it up for us. That's what it feels like. Set it up for us, Charles.
Including dinosaurs, which I still roll my eyes about every time I hear them mention, like, dinosaurs are their big ideas for this era. But
we haven't even gotten to the
you're totally right,
force
Bruce.
plants. So hold on to your butts.
But I think you're totally right, Bruce. And on the one hand, I really like how they're all plotting the storyline together. I think that's great. It's something that they haven't done often enough in other parts of Lucasfilm, and kind of tried to plan things out a little more advanced. So I'm really glad that they're doing that here. But I think in this particular case, the We Are All the Republic definitely does probably stem from them all kind of getting together and just deciding to go to use this. And again, I think the sentiment is nice, but it's probably would have been better to show and not just tell.
I think if I were Lucasfilm, this is how I would do things. I would say I would not have like this, all these writers involved in planning it. I would pick 1, 2, 3 at the most and say, and probably 2, and say, okay, you 2 are going to make a series of books. You can alternate, one writes the first one writes the second, alternate, whatever. But the 2 of you scope this whole thing out, put it all together, and you're going to write the adult novels. Now, we're going to bring in other authors in that can then build in your universe, and you kind of direct it. You're the showrunners of this, and they can then write young adult novels, children novels, whatever, games or whatever that build off of what you're creating. But when it becomes more and more people, that's where it feels too much like the committee. And I feel like it gets a little muddy.
So kind of like The Mandalorian and having Favreau and Filoni be at the top, and they're the ones directing the show in the sense that like where things are going to go, they're creating the story together, and then everybody else is working underneath them to. And we've seen from the gallery where it's very collaborative. Like all of the directors are working very closely with Favreau and Filoni. They're all having conversations together. The directors themselves are talking to each other and helping each other. So you can have all that kind of collaboration, but wow, Bruce, I think you've absolutely nailed it here. When you make story by committee, it's never as good as when you have one or just two people really helping create the vision and then move forward. I mean, I think I could not have said it better myself. So I think it's absolutely true. And William, and I think you will remember this really well. Obviously, they did the same thing, back in the Legends days when they were writing those big series, those big 9-book series that they started doing, like Legacy of the Force and Legacy of the Jedi, where they just had 3 authors. And those 3 authors worked, they alternated and they worked together. And, how all that worked, but I would say that was at least more successful in the sense of cohesion of story and thought so far.
And I get that, like, with this era, I think they're they want the interconnectivity, but they also want things to be more standalone. Because the one downside of those 9-book, sagas, which as much as we loved them, was that you had to read all of them. And I think what they're trying to do is craft a story that's interconnected without requiring that you read them all. We'll see how successful it is, because you don't have that as much of that momentum building off of each book, if they're not required reading. So I don't know, we'll see. It's still very early in this new time period.
Well, I mean, I guess that leads us to the Jedi. This series is legitimately based off of, they've said many times, it was based off of Obi-Wan Kenobi's comment, that 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. And that was one of the, defining characteristics and jumping off points for what this was going to be. A couple quotes here from that I picked up on about the Jedi here in the book is, being a Jedi is not about saving oneself. And does the action I'm about to take, one of the Jedi says, going to bring more light into the galaxy? That's how they made their decisions. On top of that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's not all of the Jedi that are mentioned, but there are at least 12 Jedi mentioned, and at least 9 of those have action throughout the story here. So, this is all about the light of the Jedi. What did you think of the Jedi in this era? And on top of that, were there any of these Jedi that stuck out to you at all?
I will say one thing I really liked about this book is I thought the characters, it was really easy to like the characters, regardless of which side they were on. We talked about how earlier we kind of liked reading about the Nihil. I really enjoyed many of the Jedi. I thought they were interesting characters. Oftentimes in new eras, it can be hard to get people to care about new characters. And I liked it. I thought, I liked Avar Kriss, and Elzar Mann and their dynamic. I liked the master apprentice relationship between Loden and Bell a lot. Porter Engle was a very interesting Jedi as well, like the Jedi cook who's been around so long. He's had so many different jobs. And of course we got many references to classic Jedi we know, like Yoda and Opal Rancisis and Yarael Poof. So I don't know. Overall, I liked a lot of the Jedi. There were a lot of them. And again, it definitely seems like there's just a lot of laying the groundwork. But I kind of wish it had been. I feel like the story really, once you read the first third of the book, it really becomes, I think like Loden and Bell take a lot of the focus, Avar and Elzar as well, to an extent. And I kind of enjoyed it more once we got to that point, rather than just jumping around between all the different Jedi and other characters.
Yeah, same here.
There's a lot of characters early on who are just like, they're only in there for a chapter and then they're dead,
Yeah.
Sorry, Bruce.
It was starting to get confusing for that reason, because there was just so many, and then, one's dead, one's dead. It's like, okay, so we're just going to rotate through a bunch of Jedi, and then as the book proceeded, later we're getting, these other Jedi, Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann and Loden and Bell, and I started to really like them because now we're spending some time with them, but still it wasn't enough. Like I'm starting to get to know them, but not real well. I think it was at one point one of the Jedis mentioned like Loden has a good sense of humor or something. And I thought, I never picked that up.
Yeah.
That's like saying we are the Republic. You're just telling me that, but I would like to know more about these Jedi. So I got interested in them. Like you're saying, actually my favorite one was Porter Engle. Just because he's been around a long time, he's an older, and then he's this cook, and I'm like, he doesn't probably do much now. He's kind of retired, and now all of a sudden he's this badass Jedi doing all kinds of stuff. I wanted to see more of him. Like, I'll take a standalone book on that guy.
Man, Bruce, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you're nailing my opinion right now in the sense that I thought he was the most interesting character of the book because of his longevity. I mean, we've only really known characters like Yoda that have been really long-lived in the Jedi Order like that. And the fact that he's done so many different things, he's been willing to be somebody who's really kind of explored every area it means and what it means to be a Jedi and different jobs and different forms was fantastic. And I wanted more of him. And I think, you both were kind of saying this, like everybody's kind of interesting. I think. Like I think. But I don't ever spend enough time with them to really care enough about if any of them die or anything like that, because I don't know them from Adam or I don't know them, put it this way, I don't know them from Luke Skywalker in this universe, so, okay. And, like, I think Avar's relationship with Elzar is really fascinating. The fact that you can obviously tell, it kind of reminds me of the Jedi Apprentice books where, you have Qui-Gon and his relationship with Tal, where they seem to have this kind of connection with each other, and that goes way beyond, and how does that play out in this part of the Republic and in this time period? Like to me, that's fascinating. But again, it's just some things that are really hinted at, and. It's interesting to see there's a ton of Force usage in this book. The Force the Jedi are using the Force in all kinds of crazy, awesome ways, which I think is cool too. Avar really, we spend the most time with her and her understanding of the Force as if it's a song that she hears, which, okay, that's interesting too. But again, we're jumping around so much that I'm not able to really spend enough time with any one of these characters to form an attachment that me, as a human being that's not a Jedi, needs. I need attachment to character. And so I think the problem is that I'm kind of interested, but I'm not really able to latch on to any one person because nobody here is actually the POV character. There isn't anybody whose story is being told here. And I think something I want to jump into you guys with this is the idea of this as an introduction. Because I'll be honest, I think there are way too many characters here, and there's way too much going on for me to care about really any of it. And in some ways, and I feel like I'm sounding harsh, but I think it's just as we're talking about the book, I'm really becoming more and more frustrated. As I've thought about this the last few days, if you think about any Star Wars movie, show, or games that have introduced us something new, they all start off with the POV, the point of view of one or two people at most, right? You know, I mean, Mandalorian just came out. First few episodes, it's all about him, right? And his point of view and getting to know him, and then we start to branch off. I think, though, to me, this feels more akin to KOTOR in the sense of what we're trying to accomplish and the part of the galaxy we're trying to be in and the time period. And that's a good example. We spend all of this time with one person. We're watching everything through their point of view. And then we kind of add new characters, but everything is still through the point of view of you asking the questions. You know, you getting to know the other characters and their stories, but through you as that point of view character. And in all honesty, I think what they should have done is they should have started off much more slowly, and that the point of view character should have been Avar. And that should have been it. Like, everything should have been through her. Like, every part of the story. You could have done the flip side, where everything's through the point of view of Marchion Ro, and those two will be your point of view characters, and that's it.
I will say, like, the fact that they had Marchion Ro's point of view, I think it added a lot of depth to the Nihil, but I also think it made them a lot less scary, because it wasn't like this unknown force. It was just, we knew exactly what they were, who they were, what they were doing. It's like, it definitely diminished their scariness. But I don't disagree. Like, on the one hand, it was nice. I did like getting to know a bunch of the Jedi, but I think you could have done it through, you know, a single person's point of view and maybe gotten a little more attached to it. I suspect it really all comes down to being they wanted this book to be an intro for the era and to introduce a whole bunch of characters. I don't know if these characters are going to be picked up by other authors in other books, but I suspect it kind of was the mission of this book to introduce the Nihil, introduce a bunch of these characters, introduce the era, and other books will pick up those characters and run with them. And I think in some ways the book kind of suffers as a result. But I also don't necessarily fault Charles Soule, because I think that's what he was told to do.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think. It almost feels to me as if the book is the setup for the game. Like, you know, you're going to play a game of chess and no one's played. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, okay, this is the pieces. These are the pieces. These are the characters. And we're eventually going to get to them. But first we're going to just set up the board for you. But, I mean, yeah, I do feel like we're being a little harsh on the book. But I think that's the piece, though, that I'm missing, is that character focus, that central character or central characters. To me, when I read a story, you know, there's times where people say, like, oh my gosh, that story was so awful and so ridiculous. But for me, it could be that way. But if the characters are interesting to me, I still have fun with it, even though the story's ridiculous. But if the story's really good, but the characters suck and I don't care, that doesn't do it for me, even if it's a good story. If I'm not connected with the characters, it doesn't really work that well for me.
Well, Bruce, golly, I feel like we're in one mind tonight, because, you know, one of the things I kind of even wrote down in our outline was the idea is that, like, in the end, this book is about plot. It's not about characters, and character should always drive the story. You know, Chris Jones and I were just talking on the Orb about one of the things that have made Deep Space Nine so successful, and Mike Pillar had a quote that when they were writing Star Trek stories, especially with Deep Space Nine, it was always about character first. Plot came second. And here, plot comes first. And we only get plot. We don't get character. And if you don't have characters for us to care about, we don't care about the story. Because I don't care how big the plot is if there's nobody in that plot that I can attach to. And again, that's, I think, the problem with the book is that if you had just made this story about introducing us to the Jedi through the eyes of Avar, who is one of the Jedi's leading lights, I think it would have been really fascinating. And I would have had one character to care about, and she would have helped introduce me to this universe. And and part of that, and I think that, and I hate to sound so harsh, but this is the easy way out. You're by not being willing to take your time with a series. They're trying to do too much too fast with too many characters and with too much going on. And again, take KOTOR as an example, where everything starts off really small. You wake up on a ship, you don't know who you are, and you got to go figure it out, right? And the rest of the game is about exploring the entire galaxy that is the KOTOR galaxy. But it's all through the point of view of one person. And so I think you needed to have somebody say, we need to hold our horses. We need to start off much slower. And I think it would be much more successful to do that because, again, then I care because I'm invested in Avar. I'm invested in Avar. Not Ivar, because that's a seafood restaurant here in the Northwest. So
I do think they have a lot of the pieces, though, which is good because, like, you know, I really liked the characters we did get, and I think had we spent more time with them, I would have been more invested. And had the plot been more focused around their character development, I think it could have been really interesting. As you said, you know, Avar is really interesting. He's, you know, she's a cool character. Porter Engle was an awesome character, right? Getting to see how, like, Bell Zettifar is trying to learn to be, try to learn how to use the Force to, like, slow his fall. And these characters I did really like. It just, I think they could have done more and that had the, I think if we got more of a focus on the characters, it probably would have been more successful. That being said, I think I enjoyed the characters in this book, and and credit to a lot of Charles Soule's writing too. It was a very easy book to read, a lot of very fun, and aside from I loved Chaos Rising last fall, but aside from that, I like the characters and I like the writing style much better than many of the other books we've gotten over the last year or two. Even if there, as we've talked about, it's not a perfect book. There was a lot of aspects I really liked about it.
Well, I mean, lastly, we have the epilogue, which is, we've got Elzar having a vision of what's coming, and apparently it's fear. Fear is coming, guys.
People are afraid of those paths. It's the paths.
I'm afraid of being afraid.
Now, would have been okay. Now, I don't like to do this, but I'm going to. I don't want to tell somebody how to write something. Oh, you should have done it this way. But in this case, it would have been better. This fear thing is if he sent something that the opening the paths has caused some kind of disruption or darkness in the Force that has created a fear that it's going to affect the Jedi and the Jedi ability to use the Force in the Outer Rim. Something to that effect where it's really impacting them, not just fear is coming to the galaxy. Because I'm not really feeling that this group, the Nihil, are the big threat to the galaxy, that there's going to be this overall fear that's going on. But something else that this is prompting that's going to bring, and just get a hint of what that is. But we didn't get that. So I'm not fearing anything.
I don't know. What do you think, William?
It was definitely an odd way to end it. I get what they're trying to do. Again, they're wanting to kind of kick off the era, get people really excited about it. Something's happening. Something's coming. But it was... I don't think just saying fear is coming was the most successful. They should have given a little more concrete information about, like, what is there to be afraid of? What is this? I don't really know.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with both of you.
I was surprised when I read it. I was like,
yeah.
What? Huh?
So, talking through the book, I'm really interested to see where you guys kind of land with your ratings here for Light of the Jedi. So, William, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think overall I did enjoy the book. It's not a perfect Star Wars book. And we talked about some of its shortcomings, but like I said, I liked a lot of the characters. I thought it had some interesting aspects of hyperspace in there as well. And so overall, like I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10, something like that. I enjoyed it. it's not a perfect book, but I'm interested to see more of what they do in the era and where they take these characters and hopefully give us more background on them and more development. And I'm very curious to see what they ended up doing with the era overall, like how separate the books are or how interconnected they are.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I did enjoy the book. I mean, when I was first reading it, it was kind of slow going. Even though the disaster is happening, there's a lot of action. I really wasn't connecting that much to it because we weren't, as we were saying before, really connecting to characters. It was just events that were happening. But once I got to the halfway point, I started to get myself more and more interested. When we started to focus a little more on characters, a little more in certain situations, I was starting to get more interested into the Nihil and that group. And so, by the end of the book, I will say, the whole thing about the fear, I was like, okay, that just kind of seems a little lost to me. But I did leave it thinking, okay, it's a nice little setup. I'm just curious to know where it goes. So I'm interested in reading the next book, whatever book that is that picks up on this story. I'm not really all that clear. I know there's different books coming, but I don't know. I guess the next adult book that comes out is the one that continues the story. But I did start to get into it, and I am curious to see where it goes. So it's a good setup, but now I'm ready to get to the meat. And I want some good characters, a lot of character development, and get to a meat of a story to the point that if I read other books, one day I want to come back and read this book and say, dang, this is a good book because it really sets up what happens later. And right now I'm just kind of like, it was okay. I'd like to see where it goes. We'll check it out. But I didn't leave this going, yes, Star Wars, it's back.
So,
it's never left.
Yeah, where does that put you ratings-wise?
Oh, yeah. Ratings-wise, I would give this 47 out of 74 times someone says, we are the Republic.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I really think...
Bruce, you're making us do math.
I don't even know what that
means.
Yeah, I don't do math. Having read the book twice, the second time through, actually my rating went down. I had it, I think, at 3.5. Out of 5 stars. But this definitely went down to 3 out of 5. Like it's decent, but it has a lot of issues, especially with this being a introduction book to an era. And they're all the issues that we talked about, so I don't need to relitigate them here. I'm hoping that, like you said, Bruce, some of the books that come up in the future can maybe ameliorate some of this. I have read a Test of Courage, and I'll say that I think that might be a better book than this, but we'll have to wait till I cover that with my friend Aaron Goins. But yeah, I'm just I would say that as it goes with the High Republic, I can't say I'm super excited right now. So I guess it's a waiting game. So we'll see what comes. But yeah, it's not bad, but I can't say it's great, and that's disappointing. I really want it to be great. I was really looking forward to this as an era, and William, you mentioned like Chaos Rising, which I just thought was beyond phenomenal as a Star Wars book, and talk about finding a way to do a new area of Star Wars with lots of new characters, but it's got a good POV, which is through Thrawn's point of view. So we know him, and that helps us then get to know the rest of that new era, new characters. So yeah, but excited to see what will be coming out next. We'll have a couple weeks here. We'll have a Test of Courage coming out. Aaron Goins joins me for that one, so we'll have to look for that. But Bruce, if people would like to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on besides talking Star Wars here on the 602 Club, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex. You can also find me on Instagram at just Admiral Rex, no underscore. And you can find me on the Star Wars Report occasionally with Riley Blanton. only when he wants me on or when I say, yes, I'm going to come on. It just all depends on schedules. And then I'm also on Positively Trek with Dan Gunther, reviewing everything that you can think of under the sun in Star Trek, from the shows to the movies to the books to whatever. I mean, we do it all on there. And then I get around other places too.
In fact, Bruce, maybe we should announce to everybody who's listening, you're going to be joining me on Literary Treks a little bit more often coming up, which is really exciting.
I was thinking of saying that, but I didn't know if I was allowed to.
No, we're very excited that you're going to be joining us every once in a while to cover, especially, we're going to be working on, you guys had been going through the 24th century books, and I think I counted, we have like 7 or 8 books left in that era that we've never covered. And so we're going to be working on that together, and then we'll see where else it goes. But I'm so excited to be having you back to join us with that, and to be able to continue that process, because my favorite era of Trek books right there. So William, it's so great to have you back. And of course, I mentioned you're on Ion Canon Podcast, but what else have you got going on, and where can people find you if they want to catch up with you and see what other Star Wars goodies and other things you've got going on?
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. This was so much fun. As you said, you can listen to me on the Ion Canon Podcast. We record weekly when there's new Star Wars television shows out, and when there's not, we take a couple weeks off, but we're often recording the books, reviewing the books, and games, etc. So that's over on Star Wars Report as well. And I'm on Twitter at MasterDevoy, DEWI. If you want to hear my thoughts on various Star Wars things.
Awesome. And of course, you can find me on any of the social media platforms out there that I'm on under Matt Rushing02. Just search for that moniker and you'd find me if I'm there. And of course, you can find me here on the network. Coming up very soon, Snyder Cuts to a 602 Club feed near you. John Mills and I are going to be walking through every directorial event, movie that Zack Snyder has done as we look towards his Zack Snyder's Justice League as well as Army of the Dead. So we promised you that we were going to grow the 602 Club area of Trek FM, and we're going to do that starting with Snyder Cuts. So we hope you'll join us for that. Of course, you can also find me doing The Orb and Literary Treks. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and goodness, we're so excited because we actually have a new episode coming out. And then, of course, the Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And both of those to do with Chris Jones. And, of course, Bruce is going to be moonlighting over there on Literary Treks again. And then you can find me on the Nerd Party Network doing 2 shows. One is called Owl Post. Doing that with Drea Kaufman is every week we talk about Harry Potter, 1 chapter at a time. And honestly, guys, we only have 10 episodes left of that show. 11 episodes of that show. So it's crazy. And then, of course, doing aggressive negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us, and may the Force be with you.